By August of 1944, the Allied advance across northern Europe had reached a critical point. After the breakout from Normandy, American forces pushed rapidly eastward toward Belgium and Luxembourg. They wanted to break through the German border defenses before winter and take advantage of Germany's increasingly stretched resources. The race to secure important crossing points along the Siegfried Line had begun. The specific region around Sambit held importance beyond its immediate value. Located at the meeting point of several important roads and railway lines, it represented a gateway into Germany's industrial heartland. German High Command had named the area as a key defensive sector. They reinforced it with parts of the 2nd SS Panzer Division and the 12th Volksgrenadier Division. Allied intelligence had identified this buildup, but the speed of the American advance had outpaced their supply support. The 101st Airborne Division had been in nearly continuous combat since D-Day. They were tasked with securing the approaches to Sambit despite being under strength and low on ammunition. "We were running on empty," remembered Lieutenant Colonel James Harwick of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment in an after-war interview. "The men had been fighting for 2 months straight. Our supply lines were stretched thin, and we were dangerously short on anti-tank ammunition." The German forces in the sector, by contrast, had been reinforced with a mechanized battle group. It consisted of 14 Panzer IV tanks, 23 armored personnel carriers, and approximately 400 infantry soldiers. Their orders were clear: hold the St. Vith approaches at all costs and prepare for a counterattack that would disrupt the Allied timetable. Between these opposing forces lay the farms and small villages of the Belgian countryside, including the 70-acre property owned by Robert Winters. His farm sat at a critical point where the narrow country road passed between two small hills before opening into a valley that led directly to the American positions. Military planners on both sides recognized this land feature as a natural choke point. Captain Thomas Delaney commanded Echo Company of the 502nd. He had set up his command post at the Winters farm on August 4th. The strategic value of the location was immediately clear to the experienced officer. "This is where they'll come through," he told his executive officer while studying maps spread on Winters' kitchen table. "If we can hold this bottleneck, we buy time for the rest of the battalion to set up a proper defensive line along the ridge." What Delaney couldn't note was that his company of 97 men faced a German force that outnumbered them more than 4-1. Nor could he guess that his ammunition supplies, especially the crucial bazooka rounds needed to stop the German armor, would be reduced to dangerously low levels after fighting off two probing attacks on August 5th and 6th. The larger strategic picture was equally concerning. The 101st Airborne's position was the leftmost flank of the 12th Army Group's advance. A successful German counterattack here could potentially roll up the entire American line. This threatened not just the immediate front, but the broader Allied advance toward Germany. Field Marshal Walter Model had recently been appointed by Hitler to stabilize the Western Front. He had personally ordered the Sambit operation as part of his strategy to take advantage of any weakness in the American advance. Documents captured after the war revealed that Model saw the St. Vith sector as a potential turning point. It was a chance to repeat the success of his defensive operations on the Eastern Front. There he had earned the nickname, the Führer's Fireman, for his ability to stabilize collapsing front lines. "The American advance has outrun the supply lines," Model wrote in his August 3rd order to the local commanders. "Their forces are tired and stretched thin. A decisive counterstrike now will shatter their momentum and force a big delay in their timetable." For the American High Command, the stakes were equally clear. General Courtney Hodges commanded the 1st Army. He had emphasized the importance of keeping forward momentum in his orders to the Corps commanders. "We must keep the Germans reacting to us, not the reverse. Every day, we maintain offensive operations pushes their final defensive line further east and denies them time to regroup. We cannot allow them to seize the initiative at any point." Between these grand strategic calculations stood farmers like Robert Winters and soldiers like Captain Delaney. These were men whose individual decisions would ultimately determine whether plans succeeded or failed. Neither the German nor American command fully appreciated how the actions of a single Belgian-American rancher would upset their careful calculations. On the evening of August 6th, a German artillery attack signaled what both sides recognized as the beginning of a major attack. Captain Delaney assessed his company's low ammunition and exhausted personnel. He made the difficult decision to pull back to the more defensible ridgeline a mile behind the Winters farm. He left behind a small rear guard with a radio to report on German movements. He intended to use artillery fire to slow the enemy advance through the bottleneck. What he didn't count on was Robert Winters' refusal to abandon his farm, or the rancher's secretive work in his workshop over the preceding 3 years of German occupation. While Allied commanders counted tanks, artillery pieces, and infantry companies, They had failed to count on the cleverness of a single determined man with an engineer's mind and a farmer's practicality. The strategic calculations of generals on both sides were about to be disrupted by a weapon that appeared on no list and figured into no battle plan. A homemade mortar built from irrigation pipes, tractor parts, and a lifetime of mechanical innovation. The night of August 6th stretched endlessly for the men of Echo Company. Artillery exchanges lit up the countryside in brief, horrible flashes. Captain Delaney paced the ridge line, checking his men's positions. He was saving their small amount of ammunition for the battle he knew would come with dawn. The decision to pull back from the winter's farm weighed heavily on him. "I don't like leaving civilians in the path of this," he told his executive officer, Lieutenant Pearson. But that stubborn Belgian refused to leave, and we don't have the manpower to force the issue. Pearson nodded grimly. "The old man knows what's coming. Said he's got a shelter under the house where they'll be safe." "Let's hope he's right," Delaney replied, looking back toward the darkened farm. "Because tomorrow is going to be hell." At the farm, Robert Winters worked through the night in his workshop. A small oil lamp provided the only light. German artillery occasionally shook the sturdy stone building, sending dust falling down from the rafters. But the rancher never paused in his careful work. Beside him, his daughter Catherine silently handed him tools. Her young face was serious beyond her 10 years. "Papa, Mama says you should come to the cellar now," she said softly after a particularly close explosion. Winters wiped grease from his hands. "Tell her I'll be there soon. Just a few more adjustments." The device taking shape before him looked like no regular weapon. Its main part was a length of irrigation pipe 4 inches across and nearly 3 feet long. It was mounted on a swiveling base made from a tractor axle. The firing system used parts from an old water pump. The base itself was held steady by metal plates saved from a broken plow. Winters checked his calculations again in a small notebook filled with exact measurements and math formulas. During the 3 years of occupation, he had secretly watched the German armor. He noted the thickness of their tank plating, the construction of their vehicles, and their weak points. More importantly, he had calculated exactly what would be needed to defeat that armor using physics principles rather than regular weapons. "Catherine, go to the cellar now," he said firmly. "Tell your mother I'll join you after I move this to position." As his daughter disappeared into the house, Winters carefully loaded his creation onto a small cart. The homemade mortar weighed nearly 200 pounds, but he had designed it to break down into 3 pieces he could carry. With careful effort, he moved it through the darkness to the edge of his pasture, where the land sloped gently down toward the road that passed between the 2 hills. There he put the weapon back together. He secured it to a concrete pad he had secretly poured months earlier, disguised as the foundation for a new storage shed. From this position, he had a clear line of fire to the road where the German column would have to pass. The distance was approximately 400 yards. Private Wilson, the American radio operator left behind to watch enemy movements, came over carefully. "Mr. Winters, sir, the captain ordered me to pull back before dawn. You really should come with me." Winters didn't look up from his work. "How many bazookas does your company have left?" Wilson paused. 3, and only 7 rockets between them. "And how many tanks are coming?" Winters pressed. "At least 14, plus infantry carriers." Winters nodded as if confirming something. "Your men will be killed on that ridge if those tanks break through. Go back to your captain and tell him I'm staying. Tell him to have his artillery ready to hit the road where it passes between the hills at exactly 7 in the morning." "But sir—" "Go, son," Winters said firmly. "This is my land. I'll defend it my way." As Wilson slowly left, Winters continued his preparations. Beside the mortar, he arranged 28 metal containers. Each was filled with a mixture he had carefully prepared and hidden over many months. To anyone else, they might have looked like milk cans, a normal sight on a dairy farm. Their contents, however, were far from ordinary. Throughout the night, Winters made tiny adjustments to his weapon's elevation and turning mechanisms. He checked and rechecked the firing system. It was a pneumatic device adapted from an old well pump that would provide the starting pressure to launch his projectiles. The German artillery continued on and off, but Winters worked with the calm precision that had been part of his entire life. In the underground cellar beneath the farmhouse, Meline prayed quietly while Catherine slept fitfully on a makeshift bed. When Winters finally joined them an hour before dawn, his wife looked at him with knowing eyes. "It's ready?" she asked simply. He nodded. "I've done what I can. Now we wait." "Robert," she said, taking his hand, "promise me you'll come back to this cellar before they arrive." He squeezed her hand but made no promise. They both knew what the morning would bring. Dawn broke with a strange quiet that experienced soldiers recognized as the calm before combat. From his observation post on the ridge, Captain Delaney looked over the valley with his binoculars. Tension was clear in every part of his body. Private Wilson had returned just before midnight with Winter's strange message. "He wants artillery fire at 7 exactly?" Delaney had asked in disbelief. "On that specific point in the road?" "Yes, sir," Wilson confirmed. He was very specific about the timing. Said he had some way to stop the tanks. Lieutenant Pearson laughed without humor. "With what? A pitchfork? We're dangerously low on anti-tank weapons ourselves." Delaney shook his head. "I don't know what the old man thinks he can do, but I'm not wasting artillery on a farmer's hunch." Now, as the morning mist began to lift from the valley, Delaney's radio crackled with reports from his forward observers. German armor was on the move, coming toward the Winters farm from the east. The battle was about to begin. In his pasture, Robert Winters made his final preparations. He had changed from his farmer's clothes into his old Belgian army uniform from the Great War. It was a symbolic gesture that went unseen. His weapon was ready. His calculations were confirmed one last time. The distance, the angle, the mixture in each projectile. Everything had been prepared with the careful precision of a man who had spent a lifetime solving practical problems. At 6:45, the first German tanks appeared at the edge of his property. Panzer IVs, their engines growling, moved in an organized column along the farm road. Behind them came the personnel carriers filled with infantry soldiers. And behind those, more tanks, exactly as intelligence had reported. 14 tanks in total. The German commander had organized his forces for a concentrated push through the bottleneck between the hills. Winters watched through a pair of old binoculars. His breathing was calm and steady. He noted the spacing between vehicles, their speed, their formation. Everything matched his predictions. The lead tank reached the point where the road began to narrow. It was exactly 387 yards from his position. He checked his watch. 6:52. In the command tank, Hauptmann von Kleist looked over the land ahead with satisfaction. The Americans had abandoned their forward positions just as he had expected. His artillery bombardment had done its work, softening up the enemy and forcing them to pull back to the ridge. Now his armor would punch through this narrow passage and into the valley beyond. It would roll up the American flank before they could organize an effective defense. "Speed up," he ordered his driver. "We must clear this bottleneck quickly." As the German column sped up slightly, Winters made his final adjustments. He loaded the first projectile, a metal container roughly the size and shape of a large coffee can, into his homemade mortar. Unlike regular mortars that used explosive propellant, Winters' design used compressed air stored in an adapted tractor tire inner tube. He had calculated that this would provide enough starting speed while making his weapon almost silent compared to traditional firearms. At exactly 6:55, with the German column now entering the narrowest part of the pass between the hills, Winters turned on his firing system. There was a soft whoosh of released air, and the first projectile arced high into the morning sky. Winters immediately began reloading. His movements were practiced and smooth. 5 seconds later, the projectile hit the ground approximately 30 yards ahead of the lead tank. There was no explosion. Instead, a thick, gooey liquid splattered across the road. It looked almost black in the early morning light. The German tank commander saw the impact and hesitated for a moment. But then he ordered his driver to continue. Whatever the Americans had fired had missed, or so it seemed. Winters fired again. A second container landed, then a third. Each one was placed exactly right to spread their contents across the road. By the fourth shot, the lead German tank was driving through the spilled liquid. The tank commander, von Kleist, looked through his vision slit with growing concern. Was this some new chemical weapon? Should he stop the column? Before he could decide, Winters struck a match and fired his fifth container. This one was different. It was a simple fire starting device of his own design. It landed among the spilled liquid and caught fire. In an instant, the entire road between the hills burst into a wall of intense flame. What the Germans hadn't realized was that Winters' first 4 projectiles contained a highly flammable mixture of used motor oil, kerosene, and a thickening agent made from rendered animal fat and calcium carbonate. It was a homemade napalm of sorts, created from materials available on any farm. The flames covered the lead tank, not damaging its armor, but superheating the metal. Inside, the temperature rose rapidly to unbearable levels. Von Kleist ordered his driver to speed up to push through the firewall, but as they did so, they rolled directly over Winters' sixth projectile. This was a different design altogether. This container held calcium carbide, a chemical Winters used for his welding torch. It was combined with water in a compartment designed to break open on impact. The resulting acetylene gas released beneath the superheated tank caught fire instantly in a focused blast that found the tank's most vulnerable point, its relatively thin bottom armor. The explosion wasn't large by military standards, but it was exactly targeted. The lead panzer shook to a halt. Black smoke poured from its hatches as its crew scrambled to escape the fire. On the ridge, Captain Delaney stared in disbelief. "What the hell is happening down there?" he demanded. No one could answer. They watched as Winters continued his careful fire. Each projectile landed with amazing precision. Some spread more of his homemade napalm, creating an ever-expanding wall of fire that trapped the German column in the narrow pass. Others were the deadly calcium carbide bombs that exploded beneath tanks or personnel carriers. The German column, packed tightly in the narrow road and now caught in a growing fire, fell into chaos. Tanks tried to reverse or turn around, crashing into vehicles behind them. Infantry soldiers jumped from their carriers only to find themselves caught in the burning liquid that now covered the road surface. "Sir," Lieutenant Pearson shouted. "It's 7 exactly." Delaney made his decision. Artillery, fire mission. Coordinate as previously designated. He barked into his radio. 30 seconds later, American artillery shells began raining down on the already chaotic German column. They were targeted exactly at the bottleneck Winters had pointed out. The combination was devastating. Trapped by fire, confused and disorganized, the German force was now being hammered by accurate artillery fire. In his firing position, Winters continued his work with careful precision. He had prepared 28 projectiles in total, 14 of his homemade napalm containers and 14 of his improvised calcium carbide bombs. He fired them in a carefully planned order, adjusting his aim as the German vehicles frantically moved around in the increasingly tight space. Private Jensen was watching through binoculars from the American line. He froze. He couldn't believe what he'd just seen. "Sir," he called to Captain Delaney, "I think that farmer just took out a panzer with some kind of homemade bomb." Delaney grabbed the binoculars. "That's impossible. No civilian could." He stopped mid-sentence as he saw another German tank lurch to a halt. Flames burst from its underside after one of Winters' projectiles found its mark. For 27 minutes, Robert Winters continued his one-man assault on the German column. By 7:30, the narrow pass between the hills had been turned into a graveyard of German armor. 8 Panzer IVs burned fiercely. Their ammunition was cooking off in secondary explosions. 11 personnel carriers were abandoned or destroyed. German infantry soldiers who had survived the initial fire found themselves caught in devastating American artillery fire. It was exactly targeted thanks to Winters' timing. Hauptmann von Kleist, badly burned but alive, staggered away from his destroyed command tank. In his 18 months on the Eastern Front, he had never seen anything like this. How could the Americans have prepared such a well-planned ambush? And where were their anti-tank guns? He could see no evidence of regular weapons, only fire, explosions, and exactly targeted artillery. By 8, the battle was effectively over. What remained of the German force? Approximately 140 disorganized infantry soldiers and the crews of 6 tanks that had managed to reverse out of the trap retreated eastward. The American artillery continued to harass them, preventing any attempt to regroup or counterattack. On the ridge, Captain Delaney gathered his officers. "I want to squad down to that farm immediately. Find out what the hell just happened." Lieutenant Pearson led the squad himself, approaching the Winters farm cautiously. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp smell of burning oil and metal. The road between the hills was covered with destroyed German vehicles. Many were still burning fiercely. German dead and wounded lay scattered across the battlefield. Their moans were audible even over the crackling flames. And there, standing calmly beside his strange machine at the edge of the pasture, was Robert Winters. His face was blackened with soot. His ancient Belgian uniform was stained with oil, but he appeared otherwise unhurt. He was carefully taking apart his homemade mortar, storing the parts on the same small cart he had used to transport it. "Mr. Winters," Pearson called, approaching with his rifle at the ready. He was still uncertain exactly what he was seeing. Winters looked up. "Lieutenant, your captain got my message, I see." He pointed toward the destroyed German column. "The artillery timing was perfect. Please give my thanks." Pearson stared at the strange device. "Sir, did you do this?" "All of this." Winters nodded matter-of-factly. "I did, but how? What is that thing?" "A mortar of sorts," Winters explained, continuing his work. "I've been designing it since the Germans first occupied this area 3 years ago. Tested parts whenever I could do so without drawing attention." He patted the partially taken apart weapon. "Nothing complicated really, just applied physics." Pearson shook his head in disbelief. "Applied physics? Sir, you just destroyed most of a German armored company with farm equipment." "Not farm equipment, Lieutenant," Winters corrected. "Farm knowledge. There's a difference." He secured the last piece of his weapon to the cart. "Now, if you'll excuse me, my wife and daughter are waiting in the cellar. They'll be worried." As Winter turned to leave, Pearson called after him. "Mr. Winters, Captain Delaney will want a full report on whatever this is." Winters paused. "Tell him I'll be available after I've seen to my family. And Lieutenant," he added, "your men might want to start processing those German prisoners. There are wounded who need help." With that, the Belgian-American rancher calmly walked back to his farmhouse. He left behind a battlefield changed by his single act of courage and cleverness. A peaceful pasture turned into a German graveyard. In the immediate aftermath of what military historians would later call the Winter's Action, confusion reigned on both sides. American command initially believed that a special operations unit must have been responsible for the devastating ambush. German high command suspected an experimental American weapon had been used. Neither could imagine that a single civilian with mechanical cleverness had changed the course of the local battle so dramatically. Captain Delaney's after-action report, submitted on August 8th, attempted to make sense of what had happened. Civilian Robert Winters, a Belgian-American farmer, single-handedly engaged and defeated a superior German armored force using an improvised mortar system of his own design and construction. Preliminary assessment indicates enemy losses of 8 Panzer IV tanks, 11 armored personnel carriers, and approximately 167 casualties. These extraordinary results were achieved through a combination of innovative engineering, precise targeting, and close knowledge of the terrain. The report was initially met with doubt at battalion headquarters. Colonel Harrison Prescott commanded the 2nd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry. He personally visited the Winters farm on August 9th to verify the claims. What he found exceeded even Delaney's account. The narrow pass between the hills remained a scene of destruction so complete that engineers were still working to clear the road. "It is difficult to overstate the tactical significance of Mr. Winters' action," Colonel Prescott wrote in his endorsement of Delaney's report. Echo Company, reduced to 93 effective soldiers and dangerously short on anti-tank ammunition, faced a German force that outnumbered them 4-1 with significant armored support. By conventional military calculation, Echo Company should have been overrun, potentially compromising the entire regimental flank. Mr. Winters' intervention not only prevented this outcome, but caused casualties on the enemy at a ratio of approximately 20-1 with no American losses. Word of the Belgian farmers' victory spread quickly through American units in the sector. Morale, which had been dropping after weeks of continuous combat, surged. If one civilian with farm tools could stop a German armored company, what could trained American soldiers accomplish? For Robert Winters himself, however, the aftermath was more complicated. Military intelligence officers questioned him extensively about his improvised weapon system. Engineers from Ordnance technical intelligence teams took apart and studied his homemade mortar. They marveled at its elegant simplicity and devastating effectiveness. "It wasn't designed to be mass-produced," Winters explained to the frustrated engineers who wanted to copy his success. "It was designed for one specific location, one specific target, using materials I had available. The principles could be adapted, certainly, but not the exact device. Those principles, using readily available chemicals in innovative combinations, targeting weak points through exact placement rather than raw explosive power, using terrain as a force multiplier, would eventually find their way into both military doctrine and resistance handbooks." But in the immediate aftermath, security concerns came first. Winters and his family were quietly moved to a safe area behind American lines. His role in the battle was classified. The German response was equally telling. Intercepted communications revealed that Field Marshal Model personally investigated the St. Vith failure. His conclusion, that the Americans had used a new type of precision-guided weapon, led to a reallocation of German armor away from the sector. This further eased pressure on the advancing American forces. One Belgian farmer with a pipe bomb just convinced the Wehrmacht we have a secret weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Harwick reportedly joked at a staff meeting. "I'd say that's a pretty good return on investment for the Winters family." The months following the battle brought big changes. Robert, Meline, and Catherine were eventually transported to England. There Robert served as a technical consultant to Allied intelligence. He helped to develop tactical guides for resistance fighters across occupied Europe. His skill in creating effective weapons from everyday materials proved invaluable as the Allies prepared for operations in German territory. After the war, the Winters family returned to the United States, settling once again in Montana. Robert went back to ranching. He turned down many offers from engineering firms and the military. The quiet rancher never looked for recognition for his actions, and due to the classified nature of intelligence reports, his role remained largely unknown outside a small circle of military professionals. It wasn't until 1969, 25 years after the battle, that the full story was declassified. By then, Robert Winters was 71 years old. He was still running his ranch with the same careful precision he had applied to his homemade mortar. When a military historian tracked him down for an interview, Winters' response was characteristically modest. "I just did what needed doing," he told the historian. Anyone with a background in engineering and animal husbandry could have figured it out. This statement, so typical of Winters' practical humility, hid the extraordinary nature of his achievement. Military analysts who later studied the battle estimated that Winters' action had saved between 400 and 600 American lives. The German force, had it broken through, would likely have compromised the entire American advance in the sector. This potentially could have delayed the Allied push toward Germany by weeks or even months. In 1972, Robert Winters finally received formal recognition when he was awarded the Medal of Freedom. It is the highest civilian honor in the United States. The ceremony at the White House was attended by several surviving members of Echo Company, including Captain Delaney, by then a retired colonel. President Nixon's citation acknowledged not just Winters' extraordinary battlefield achievement, but his years of subsequent service advising Allied intelligence. "Mr. Winters represents the best of American ingenuity and courage," the citation read. His actions not only saved hundreds of American lives, but demonstrated that the human spirit, armed with determination and creativity, can overcome seemingly impossible odds. Winters accepted the medal with characteristic humility. When asked by reporters how it felt to be recognized after so many years, he smiled slightly and said, "I'm just a rancher who remembered his physics lessons at the right moment." The recognition came with renewed interest in Winters' story. Military academies added the Winters action into their tactical studies. They emphasized how unconventional approaches could defeat superior forces. Engineering programs cited his homemade mortar as a classic example of appropriate technology, using available resources to solve complex problems. Resistance movements around the world studied his methods. Perhaps the most meaningful recognition, however, came in the form of letters. Hundreds of them arrived at the Winters Ranch from former soldiers and their families. Many were from men who had served with Echo Company or later units that had advanced through the Sambit sector. "My father always said he owed his life to a Belgian farmer," wrote the daughter of one paratrooper. "Now I finally understand what he meant." Robert Winters lived to the age of 89. He passed away peacefully on his Montana ranch in 1987. His workshop, preserved by his daughter Catherine after his death, revealed the depth of his mechanical genius. Journals dating back to the occupation contain detailed observations of German equipment, exact calculations, and careful designs. They are evidence of a mind that combined practical knowledge with theoretical understanding in extraordinary ways. In 2003, a small monument was built near Sambit, Belgium, at the site of the former Winters farm. The inscription in French, Flemish, and English reads simply, "Here on August 7, 1944, one man with courage and ingenuity changed the course of a battle." Robert Winters, 1888 to 1987. Farmer, engineer, hero. Local residents still tell the story of the Belgian-American rancher who turned his pasture into a German graveyard. They point to the small pass between the hills, long since cleared of the battle's debris, where nature has reclaimed the land that once ran with fire. In spring, wildflowers bloom where Panzer tanks once burned. A living monument to peace restored through one man's determination to protect his home and family. Military historians continue to debate the broader implications of Winters' action. Some argue it was merely a tactical success with limited strategic impact. Others say that by preventing a German breakthrough at a crucial moment, Winters may have saved the entire Allied timetable for the advance into Germany. What remains undisputed is the math of what happened on that August morning. One farmer with no formal military training, armed with a homemade weapon built from irrigation pipes and tractor parts, defeated 14 German tanks and approximately 400 troops. The casualty ratio, estimated at 20 to 1, ranks among the most lopsided in modern military history. For the men of Echo Company who witnessed the battle from the ridge, the lesson was both simpler and more profound. As Lieutenant Pearson later put it in his memoir, "We have been fighting with rules that the enemy could afford to break." Winters showed us that victory sometimes requires thinking beyond those rules, not abandoning them, but going beyond them through innovation and courage. This transcendence, this willingness to reimagine what was possible with limited resources, became Winters' most lasting legacy. In the decades following World War II, military doctrine increasingly added the principles he had demonstrated: unconventional approaches, targeted weak points, innovative use of available materials, and exact application of force rather than overwhelming firepower. The story of Robert Winters reminds us that history's course is often changed not by grand strategies or advanced technologies, but by the cleverness and determination of individuals facing impossible circumstances. In the complex equation of warfare, such human factors remain the most unpredictable and often the most decisive. The morning of August 7, 1944, began with mathematical certainty. The German force outnumbered the Americans 4-1. Their armor was superior. Their position was good. By conventional military calculation, the outcome was predetermined. Yet by noon that equation had been completely rewritten by one man's refusal to accept its conclusion. As we look back across the decades at the smoke-filled valley near Sanvit, at the burning German tanks, and the solitary figure of a 56-year-old rancher standing beside his homemade mortar, we are reminded of a truth that military planners often forget. In the mathematics of courage, one can sometimes be greater than 400. The morning mist still rises from the fields around Sanvit. The road still passes between those two small hills. Cattle once again eat grass in pastures where a battle once raged. But beneath the peaceful surface lies the memory of that extraordinary day. A day when a Belgian-American rancher named Robert Winters turned his knowledge of physics, engineering, and chemistry into a weapon that changed the course of a battle and saved hundreds of American lives. Would you have stayed behind as Winters did, knowing the overwhelming force coming toward your home? Would you have broken convention, reimagining what was possible with the materials at hand? Would you have trusted your own knowledge and instincts over military doctrine and formal weapons? These questions echo across the decades, challenging us to consider the nature of courage and innovation in our own lives. They remind us that history is shaped not just by those in command, but by individuals at crucial moments who refuse to accept conventional limitations. The story of Robert Winters deserves to be remembered not just as a tale of battlefield heroism, but as a testament to human cleverness and the power of applied knowledge. In a world increasingly dominated by specialized technology and formal systems, his example reminds us that sometimes the most effective solutions come from outside conventional thinking. Share this story so others will remember what true courage and innovation look like. Tell the tale of the rancher who turned his pasture into a German graveyard, not through hatred or violence for its own sake, but through the determined application of knowledge to protect what he loved. For in that distinction lies the true heroism of Robert Winters. Not that he defeated an enemy, but that he defended a principle, that cleverness and determination, properly applied, can overcome seemingly impossible odds. As dawn broke over his Belgian pasture on August 7, 1944, Robert Winters faced a choice that few of us will ever confront. The mathematical certainty of defeat stood before him. Convention said to retreat. Military doctrine offered no solution with the resources at hand. Yet in that moment, Winters chose to rewrite the equation. He applied knowledge accumulated over a lifetime to create a solution where none seemed possible. In doing so, he demonstrated a truth that echoes far beyond the battlefield, that the human capacity for innovation, combined with the courage to act, can transform the seemingly impossible into the achievable. That legacy, more than the destroyed tanks or the saved lives or the military honors, remains Robert Winters' greatest contribution to history. The pasture has returned to peace now. The smoke has long since cleared, but the lesson remains, carried forward by each person who hears this extraordinary story and asks themselves, what impossible equations might I rewrite through knowledge and courage? What conventional limitations might I go beyond through innovation and determination? For in asking these questions, we honor the legacy of Robert Winters, Belgian immigrant, American rancher, self-taught engineer, and reluctant hero, who on a summer morning in 1944 turned his peaceful pasture into a German graveyard and reminded the world that in the mathematics of courage, one can sometimes equal many. August 7, 1944, the Belgian countryside near Sanvit. Robert Winters stood in the open field behind his farmhouse. The morning fog still hung over the rolling pasture where his cattle used to eat grass. His rough, worn hands held the strange machine he'd built from old pipes, wood, and metal from his barn workshop. Sweat dripped down his forehead, even though the morning air was cool. A mile away, the low rumble of German Panzer tank engines echoed through the valley. Another group of military vehicles was coming toward the American soldiers who were just beyond his farm. "They're coming," said Private First Class Wilson. He was the young radio operator who'd been left behind at Winters' farm when the company pulled back 2 days earlier. "Battalion says we need to fall back right away." Winters didn't answer. His eyes got narrow as he made final changes to his homemade weapon. The American troops were tired and didn't have much ammunition left. He'd heard their commander yesterday. They couldn't fight off another German attack. "Sir, we need to go now," Wilson said, his voice shaking with fear. Winters looked up at the ridge where the American defense position was already being left empty, then back to his farmhouse, where his wife and daughter had taken shelter in the underground cellar. 3 generations of Winters had worked this land, Belgian by birth, American by choice. He moved to America in 1927, but came back to take over his family farm just before the war started. "You go," Winter said, his voice steady. "Tell your captain I'll buy him some time." Wilson stared at the 56-year-old rancher and his weird machine. "With that, sir, that's suicide." Winters changed the metal tube's angle by a few degrees. "My grandfather fought at Liege in the Great War. He knew something about stopping Germans." He patted the homemade weapon. "So do I." As Wilson slowly pulled back, Winters figured out the distance again. He remembered the math formulas his engineering professor had drilled into him during his single year at college many years ago. The German column would come out from the tree line and cross his lower pasture. It was a natural bottleneck where the road got narrow between 2 small hills. He struck a match and lit the small oil lamp that would heat his firing system. Then he waited. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. No one in the 101st Airborne Division knew that one rancher's brave stand that morning would change the battle plan of the entire Belgian front, or that his homemade mortar would soon turn his peaceful pasture into a German graveyard. Robert Winters was born in 1888 in a small farming town outside of Liege, Belgium. He was the son of a dairy farmer and a school teacher. Young Robert showed early skill with math and fixing machines. This made him different from his 4 brothers and sisters. His mother saw his talents and saved every franc she could to send him to high school in the city. This was a rare chance for a farming family with little money. "My father always said that Robert could fix anything with wire and hard work," his younger sister, Elise, would later remember. "He once rebuilt our neighbor's tractor engine using parts from a broken threshing machine and some copper tubing from our barn." Even though he was smart, Robert stayed deeply connected to the family farm. He worked alongside his father before school and during holidays. He developed strong muscles and practical knowledge that would help him throughout his life. When the Great War started in 1914, Robert was too young to fight, but the war changed him deeply. The German occupation of Belgium showed the 16-year-old the brutal truth about war. His father was briefly put in jail for refusing to give livestock to German officers who demanded it. 2 cousins died fighting with the Belgian resistance. "The Germans took everything," Robert wrote in a letter to his future wife, Meline, years later, "but they couldn't take our dignity or our determination." After the war, Robert managed to go to the University of Liege for engineering, but money problems forced him to stop his studies after just 1 year. Frustrated by Belgium's slow recovery and few opportunities, Robert set his sights on America. In 1927, at age 29, he sold his small inheritance to buy passage to New York. He carried little more than a suitcase, his engineering textbooks, and a letter of introduction to a distant uncle in Pennsylvania. Moving to American life wasn't easy. Robert worked many different jobs: factory worker, mechanic, farmhand. He moved westward until he ended up in the cattle country of Montana. There, his combined knowledge of farming and mechanics made him valuable to local ranchers. By 1932, he had saved enough money to rent a small cattle farm of his own. It was at a local livestock auction that he met Meline Fournier. She was a French-Canadian woman whose family had settled in Montana 1 generation earlier. He wasn't the handsomest man at the dance, Meline would later tell their daughter, but he was the only one who could talk about poetry and fix a tractor in the same conversation. They married in 1933, and their daughter Catherine was born the following year. The young family survived the Depression through Robert's mechanical cleverness. He added to their ranching income by fixing farm equipment for neighbors. He often accepted payment in livestock or goods when cash was hard to find. His workshop became famous in 3 counties for his creative solutions to mechanical problems. He had no idea that soon those skills would be all that stood between his family and destruction. When news reached Montana about the Nazi invasion of Belgium in 1940, Robert was heartbroken. Communication with his family in Liege was cut off. Although now an American citizen, his connections to his homeland stayed strong. When his mother's sister sent word through the Red Cross that Robert's family farm near Sambit had been abandoned during the German advance, Robert made a decision that puzzled his neighbors but felt right to him. "Some debts can't be paid from an ocean away," he told Meline as they discussed selling their Montana ranch to return to Belgium. In February of 1941, before America entered the war, Robert made plans to return to Belgium with Meline and 7-year-old Catherine. Using the money from selling their Montana property, they bought his family's abandoned farm near Sambit. The local Belgian farmers, many of whom remembered the Winters family, welcomed Robert home, but they questioned the wisdom of bringing his American family into occupied territory. "People thought we were crazy," Meline later remembered, But Robert said America would join the war eventually, and when freedom came, we needed to be there to take back what was ours. For 3 years, the Winters family lived under German occupation. Robert maintained a careful appearance of being neutral while secretly supporting local resistance efforts. His workshop became a place where mechanical repairs often disguised the creation of tools and weapons for the resistance. German officers occupying the region found the American-Belgian farmer useful for fixing their vehicles, but they never suspected that he memorized every detail of their equipment, movements, and conversations. What Robert observed during those years of occupation gave him close knowledge of German military equipment. This knowledge would prove deadly when combined with his mechanical cleverness and exact mathematical mind. He had watched, he had learned, and he had quietly prepared. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944 sent shock waves through occupied Belgium. German forces began moving around, and the first Allied units pushed toward the Belgian border by late July. Sandvik was located near important supply routes into Germany. It became a point of strategic importance as both armies moved for advantage. Robert Winter's farm sat at the intersection of two country roads that had suddenly become militarily important. He knew that freedom or destruction was coming, and he had made his preparations long before the first American scout appeared at his door on the rainy evening of August 1st, 1944. No one could have predicted that in less than a week his quiet pasture would become the stage for an act of individual courage that would save hundreds of American lives and earn the humble rancher a place in military history that he never looked for.